There is a Greek proverb, a society grows great when old men plant trees whose shade they know they shall never sit in. What are the greatest examples of this in human history?
Joseph Bazalgette was a Victorian engineer who masterminded London's modern sewer system in the 1860s. He foresaw the insane population growth, and when all the calculations were made on how big to bore the pipes underground, he essentially said, "Nah, let's double it." Now, infrastructure that would have been unable to cope in the 1960s is still in use today.
Yeah, he also insisted on the use of Portland cement, which was much more durable. That said, it still just dumped the effluent into the river, turning it toxic. Several people died from ingesting the dirty water while trying to escape a sinking ship in the SS Princess Alice accident. But you really appreciate the better sewers when you visit other cities that weren't so lucky to have such a visionary engineer, and you can smell the sewers on the street as they weren't dug as deep.
And Dubai was like, actually, we can just get slaves from Pakistan and India and make them truck our shit away, and we won't need pipes or storage tanks or none of that new-timey bullshit. Nothing works better than an old-fashioned, hungry, isolated, contractually obligated slave.
Norway's sovereign wealth fund. That generation could have taken a selfish view and just taken the cash, or politicians just gone on a vote-buying spree. But it's independently invested and managed for the benefit of future generations.
Australia and our mines. So much money given to billionaires to keep our jobs.
Not just billionaires, multinational companies receive huge tax subsidies to keep operating. Seriously, if they're not competitive without subsidies, then let them fail and nationalize the fallout.
During the Napoleonic Wars, there was a Royal Navy admiral who, when on leave, used to wander his country estate, planting oak trees to provide timber for the Navy. It's estimated they are about ready now.
Sweden did something similar, and then the Office of Forestry informed the Navy that their oaks are ready now in 1975.
If I remember correctly, the story goes that the warden of the forest that took care of the oaks at Unsung called the royal court to tell the king that the trees are ready. Eventually, he was put trough and allowed to talk to the king. The king found it very amusing and invited the warden to the royal palace for dinner and drinks. Edit. After a quick Google, my story does not seem to be accurate, and the OP is correct in that the Marine was informed, not the king. However, as I was told, the king's story on a school trip to Grana, Great Polka Candy, and Unsung, I choose to believe it anyways.
The old Japanese people who volunteered to clean up nuclear waste sites from the WWE bombings. They knew that they likely wouldn't live long enough to suffer the worst of the effects of radiation, so they did it to protect younger people from experiencing it and to clean up Japan for future generations. It's really heartwarming.
They did the same thing after Fukushima. I'm old and will die before the radioactivity kills me, so I will go rescue them.
It's great that they did that, especially because after I read this question, I immediately thought of the firefighters in Chernobyl. They went into the reactor to prevent the disaster from escalating further, saving lives. They probably didn't know their heroic act would cut their life short.
I am fairly certain that the Chernobyl heroes would have known that diving into a nuclear reactor for a while would kill them, but did so nonetheless. They did a great service to humanity at the cost of their lives.
They definitely knew. There are accounts of them discussing exposure and how long they could stay in before dying. The Cassini family map, a first-of-its-kind map of France. It took 4 generations of family members and 6 decades to complete. Imagine being that second family member. Your whole life, your father works on this map, only for you to work your whole life on it while raising your son to do the same, and it takes a whole other life for it to be completed.
Reminds me of Cologne Cathedral that took 600 years to build. Admittedly, they took a 300-year lunch break in the middle, with a crane being parked on top of the building for 400 years. Imagine your family going 20 generations and not seeing the start or the end of the project.
The giant cathedrals in Europe, like Notre Dame, would take over 100 years to build. So the person who started building it would work their whole life on it and know they wouldn't be alive to see it complete.
I have recently been to Cologne's cathedral. They started building it in 1248. They stopped unfinished in 1560. Then halfway through the 1800s, they started building it again, finishing it in 1880. Not only the original builders would not see it finished, but neither would their grandchildren.
The huge cathedral in Florence took more than 180 years to build. It was sitting there without the final biggest dome for like 30 years because they couldn't figure out how to make the hexagonal dome stable enough to support itself. So the guy that started it didn't even intend to see it finished. But he also gave the younglings a challenge to complete in a better time.
Roosevelt and national parks. If he never did what he did, there wouldn't be any today. Corporate greed would have wiped it all out.
Even on a smaller scale, people who had the foresight when suburban expansion was happening to set aside some land. I live in a New York City suburb, and my town is blessed with a huge, relative to the town's size, public park that has a public pool, a lake for swimming and fishing, a freshwater spring, hiking trails, picnic areas, open fields and athletic fields. It is open not only to the residents of the town, but to surrounding towns as well. It is a gem that benefits all the area residents. We have this only because one man, just one man, saw the need to preserve open space in the face of suburban sprawl in the late 60s, early 70s. He donated some of his own land and then appealed to the state and federal governments to purchase the adjacent plots to preserve the land for future generations. He was successful, and the park is named after him. Had he not done that, that land would have just been another 10 single-family home subdivisions by the time the 80s rolled around. My kids, not even born until 30-plus years later, have enjoyed this park their entire lives. Edit. Lots of great guesses, none correct though, and I'm gonna keep you guessing. It warms my heart to know that other awesome people took this same initiative in different areas.
William Wilberforce. He campaigned in the British government for over 40 years to stop and prevent slavery. He was successful in abolishing the trading of slaves throughout the empire with the Slave Trade Act of 1807 and then the ownership of slaves altogether with the Slavery Abolition Act 1833. He died 3 days after hearing the Abolition Act had passed in Parliament after a lifetime of campaigning for it. He is buried in Westminster Abbey, which is reserved for monarchs and national figures of significance. His campaign for abolition was the blueprint that other abolitionists like Lincoln soon followed up with. There are many generations living because of this man's choices. Edit. And if his good karma wasn't already high enough, he was also a founding member of the Royal Society of Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, RSPCA.
Subscribe to the channel for more fascinating stories.